Story 1. I've been lurking on this sub for years, but never thought I'd have something to contribute. This happened about 6 years ago when I was living in northern Michigan in a small cabin near the UP. I worked remotely as a programmer, so the isolation didn't bother me much. The cabin was surrounded by dense forest on three sides with a small creek running behind it. I'd moved there to save money and focus on work after a bad breakup. One night in late October, I was up coding till about 2 a.m. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and I remember thinking I should check if any pipes might freeze. I bundled up and went outside with a flashlight to check the connection points around the foundation. It was one of those perfectly still nights where sound carries forever. No wind, just absolute silence, except for the occasional distant owl. The moon was bright enough that I hardly needed my flashlight. I was checking the north side of the cabin when I heard a sound like twigs snapping rhythmically. At first I thought it was a deer, but it had this weird cadence to it, too deliberate. I shined my light toward the tree line, but saw nothing. "Hello," I called out, thinking maybe it was my neighbor from half a mile away, though that made no sense at that hour. The snapping stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Then I heard it, a soft, high-pitched humming, not like an insect or a bird, but almost melodic. It reminded me of when someone hums absent-mindedly to themselves, except it kept shifting pitch in ways that made my skin crawl. "Who's there?" I called again, my voice sounding pathetically small. The humming stopped. Then a voice replied, "Just passing." The voice sounded neither male nor female and had this weird accent I couldn't place. Not quite Irish or Scottish, but something old. I swung my flashlight toward the voice and caught a glimpse of something that still haunts me. Between two pine trees stood what looked like a person, but the proportions were all wrong. It was maybe 4 feet tall, with limbs too long for its body. Its skin reflected my flashlight with a greenish-gray sheen, like wet tree bark. What really got me were the eyes, completely black and twice as large as they should have been. They reflected nothing, just absorbed my flashlight beam like two holes in reality. It smiled at me. God, that smile. The mouth stretched literally from ear to ear, filled with small, needle-like teeth. "Your light hurts," it said in that same unplaceable accent. "Better to see in dark, yes?" I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. My rational mind was racing for explanations. A hiker with some skin condition? A prank? But deep down, I knew. The thing took a step forward, moving with an unnatural fluidity, like its joints bent in all the wrong places. "May I have water?" it asked, gesturing toward my cabin. "Been walking paths long time." That's when I noticed its hands. Only 4 fingers, each ending in what looked like a hooked black claw. "No," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Please leave." Its smile faltered, and the air around us seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Not hospitable?" it said, now sounding disappointed. "Old ways forgotten here." The creature made a clicking sound with its tongue, then tilted its head at an impossible angle, nearly touching its shoulder with its ear. "Mark this one," it whispered, though I couldn't tell if it was speaking to me or to someone. Something else I couldn't see in the darkness beyond. That's when I ran. I didn't look back, just bolted for my door, fumbling with the keys so badly I dropped them twice before getting inside. I locked every window and door, then sat in the center of my living room with all the lights on until dawn. I told myself I'd imagined it or that it was some elaborate prank, but deep down I knew better. The next morning I found small, strange footprints in the soft earth where I'd seen the thing. They looked almost human except the toes were too long and pointed backward. I moved out 3 weeks later, told everyone it was because I got a better job offer in the city, but that wasn't it. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that soft, melodic humming outside my window. Whatever I saw that night wasn't human, not even close. I don't know if it was a fairy or elf or whatever you want to call it, but it was old, like it existed long before us and will be here long after we're gone. Story 2, I've never been one for ghost stories or supernatural BS, but what happened to me last summer in the forests of northern Michigan still haunts me. I worked as a forest ranger at Huron National Forest for 3 years. Mostly quiet work monitoring wildlife, cleaning trails, and occasionally helping lost hikers. I'm Dan, 34, lived alone in a small cabin about 20 minutes from the ranger station. Most days were peaceful, just me, the trees, and whatever wildlife crossed my path. Until that night in July. It was around dusk, maybe 8:30 p.m. I was finishing my evening patrol along the eastern boundary where we'd had reports of illegal camping. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, and I was eager to wrap up and head home. Then I heard it, singing. Not like someone blasting music from a campsite, but actual singing. A voice so pure and strange it made the hair on my neck stand up. It wasn't in English, or any language I could identify. "Hello," I called out, switching on my flashlight. "Park's closing soon. Anyone there?" No response, but the singing continued. It seemed to come from a dense thicket about 50 yards off the main trail. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. "This is Park Ranger Daniel Mercer," I announced, pushing through the underbrush. "I need to speak with you about camping regulations." The singing stopped abruptly. Complete silence fell over the forest, not even insects chirping. That's when I realized something was very wrong. In Michigan forests, there's always noise. Always. When everything goes silent, it usually means a predator is nearby. I froze, heart pounding, when my flashlight beam caught something that shouldn't exist. Standing between two ancient oaks was what I can only describe as not human. About 4 feet tall, impossibly thin, with skin like birch bark. Not white, but actually textured like bark. Its eyes reflected my flashlight like a deer's would, but they were huge, taking up too much of its face. "What the fuck?" I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. It tilted its head, studying me with those reflective eyes, then smiled. Its teeth were like tiny pebbles, hundreds of them. "Watcher," it said in perfect English, though its mouth barely moved. "You shouldn't be here after sundown." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My training abandoned me completely. It took a step toward me, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for its spindly limbs. "We allow you here during day. Night belongs to us." "Who? What are you?" I finally managed. It made a sound like branches cracking in wind. Laughing, I realized with horror. "Older than your grandmother's grandmother," it replied. "Older than your iron roads and stone houses." I started backing away slowly. "I'm leaving. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." It nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good watcher. Smart watcher. Tell no one of this meeting." Then it began singing again. That same haunting melody. As it sang, I swear to God, it just faded. Not like it walked away or ran, but like it literally became transparent until there was nothing there but trees and shadows. I ran all the way back to my truck, radio in hand, though I never called it in. Who would believe me? What would I even say? I quit my job the following week, told my supervisor I needed to move closer to family. Never went back into those woods again. I've spent countless hours researching what I saw. Native American legends speak of forest spirits. European folklore mentions wood elves and fae folk. Nothing quite matches what I encountered. All I know is there are things in this world we don't understand. Things that hide in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. And sometimes, if you're unfortunate enough, you might meet one face to face. Story 3. I'm not the type to believe in paranormal stuff. I've always been the skeptic, the guy who rolls his eyes when someone starts talking about ghost sightings or UFOs. My friends call me Doubting Thomas because I need hard evidence for everything. That was before what happened when I was 9. Growing up in Grimsby, a small fishing town on England's east coast, life was pretty ordinary. Our house was nothing special, a narrow 2-story brick home crammed between identical houses on a quiet street. My room was upstairs, overlooking the back garden with its patchy grass and my dad's sad attempt at a vegetable patch. It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember because we just started learning about the Anglo-Saxons at school, and I was struggling through homework about their settlements. The radiator in my room made this annoying clicking sound as it heated up, and the sky outside had turned that dull gray that meant winter was coming. "Thomas, dinner in 30 minutes!" Mom yelled up the stairs. "Yeah, okay," I shouted back, not looking up from my textbook. The house was quiet except for the muffled sound of the TV downstairs. Some cooking show Mom was watching. Dad wouldn't be home for another hour at least. He worked late shifts at the fish processing plant back then. I was trying to draw a map of some Anglo-Saxon village when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. At first I thought it was just the house creaking. Old houses make weird noises, right? But then it happened again, more deliberate. I looked up from my desk. Standing in my doorway was... Christ, even now I don't know how to describe it properly. A gnome, I guess. But not the garden ornament kind with the pointy red hat. This was different. About 2 feet tall, with leathery skin the color of tree bark. Its face was old, ancient looking, with deep wrinkles around eyes that were too large and too dark for its face. No beard, no pointy hat, just wispy gray hair and clothes that looked like they were made from leaves and some kind of rough fabric. I froze. My pencil dropped from my hand and rolled across my exercise book. The thing just stood there, watching me. Its head tilted slightly like it was studying me, like I was the strange one. "Hello," I said, barely above a whisper. It didn't respond, just kept staring with those huge black eyes. Then it blinked, sideways like a lizard. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking, this isn't real. I'm dreaming or something. But the cold air from the hallway felt real. The smell, like wet earth and something vaguely metallic, felt real. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The floorboard under my left foot creaked. It always did. The creature flinched at the sound. Its eyes widened even more, which I wouldn't have thought possible. "What are you?" I asked, taking a step forward. That was enough to spook it. It turned quickly, too quickly, like watching a video on fast forward, and darted toward the wall beside my bedroom door. I lunged forward, thinking it would crash into the wall, but it just vanished, right through the solid wall like it wasn't even there. I ran to the spot and pressed my hands against the wallpaper. Solid. I even knocked on it, thinking maybe there was some hidden passage or something. Nothing. Just the same boring floral wallpaper that had been there since before we moved in. "Mom!" I yelled, bolting down the stairs. "Mom!" She was sitting on the sofa, recipe book in hand. "What? What's wrong?" "There was something in my room, like a little man or something. It went through the wall." She laughed, of course. "Tommy, have you been reading those fantasy books again? I told you they'd give you nightmares." "I wasn't asleep. It was right there." I was on the verge of tears, not because I was scared anymore, but because I could see she didn't believe me. "Come on, love. Help me set the table. Dad will be home soon, and you know how grumpy he gets when dinner's late." She never believed me. No one did. I stopped talking about it after a few days because I could tell people thought I was either lying for attention or that I'd fallen asleep at my desk and dreamed the whole thing. But I know what I saw. Story 4. I'm Jacob, a 34-year-old outdoor guide from Burlington, Vermont. I've spent most of my life exploring the Green Mountains, leading everything from day hikes to week-long backpacking excursions. Nothing prepares you for something you can't explain. It was mid-July when I took a group of 8 teenagers on our annual wilderness trek through a remote section of the Long Trail. Most of these kids were city dwellers whose parents wanted them to connect with nature. They were good kids, mostly glued to their phones before we went off-grid. By day 4, we'd settled into a rhythm. That evening, we reached Miller Pond Shelter, a basic wooden structure tucked away about half a mile from the main trail. It's one of those enclosed shelters with 4 walls, a solid roof, and a door that doesn't quite close right without some effort. "This place is haunted for sure," joked Marcus, our resident horror movie buff, as we approached. "Every shelter looks haunted if you stare at it long enough," I replied, unlocking the door and swinging it open. The interior was musty but intact. Wooden sleeping platforms lining the walls, a small table, and a stone fireplace that hadn't been used in months. Standard backcountry accommodation, nothing unusual. After dinner, something weird happened. These teenagers, who had spent most evenings complaining about lack of Wi-Fi, suddenly decided to have an impromptu sing-along. It was so unexpected and wholesome that I grabbed my camera to capture the moment. "Let's do Hakuna Matata," suggested Amber, and soon they were belting out Disney songs like they were auditioning for something. I propped my digital camera on the table, hit record, and let it run while I organized supplies for our final day's hike. The singing continued for about an hour, Disney songs, camp classics, and then somehow they all knew every word to Weird Al's Albuquerque. I don't know how kids today even know that song, but they performed the entire 11-minute epic with theatrical flourishes. By 10, everyone was exhausted. The kids zipped into sleeping bags and I took the platform nearest the door as usual. My assistant guide Mitch slept on the opposite side with his golden retriever, Cooper, a therapy dog we'd gotten special permission to bring along. I fell asleep almost immediately. The mountains will do that to you. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake to growling. Deep, threatening growls I'd never heard from Cooper before. The dog stood rigid at the door, hackles raised, teeth bared. "Cooper, quiet," Mitch whispered, but Cooper wouldn't budge. The shelter door began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing force, slamming against the frame despite there being no wind outside. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. Clear night, no storm. "Probably just a raccoon," I said, more to convince myself than Mitch. I approached the door cautiously. Cooper's growling intensified, and he snapped when I got too close. This wasn't normal behavior for him. He was the kind of dog children mistook for a pony ride at parks. The door kept slamming, 5, 6, 7 times in succession. Then complete silence. "What the hell?" Mitch whispered. I grabbed my headlamp and peered outside. The night was perfectly still, moonlit trees casting long shadows, not even a breeze disturbing the leaves. Nothing moved in the clearing around the shelter. After securing the door shut with paracord, I managed to get Cooper calmed down enough that we could all try to sleep again. I dozed fitfully for the remaining hours, jumping at every creak of the old shelter. The next morning, nobody mentioned anything unusual. The kids packed up, hiked out to the trailhead where parents waited, and life went on. A successful trip by all accounts. A week later, I was cleaning gear and uploading photos when I remembered the sing-along video. I connected my camera to my laptop and clicked through the files from that night. The video started normal enough. Teenagers singing Disney songs, laughing, being goofy. Then came a gap between songs, maybe 15 seconds of relative quiet as they decided what to sing next. That's when I heard it. A deep voice, completely unlike any of the kids or Mitch, unmistakably asked, "Do you want to die?" I nearly knocked my laptop off the table. I rewound, turned up the volume, and played it again. There it was, clear as day. A voice that shouldn't have been there. What made it more chilling was the kids' reaction, or lack thereof. They continued right into Albuquerque without pause. They hadn't heard it. How could they not have heard it? I've analyzed that footage dozens of times. The voice doesn't match anyone in our group. It doesn't sound like it's coming from outside. It sounds like it was right there with us, in that gap between songs, asking a question I can't forget. I haven't led a trip to Miller Pond Shelter since then. I tell people it's because the roof leaks or the location isn't great. The truth is, I don't know what was out there that night, but it knew we were there. It could speak, and for whatever reason, only my camera picked it up. When people ask me if I believe in the supernatural, I don't have a quick answer anymore. But I do know this. Something was watching us in those woods, and I never want to hear that voice again. Story 5. I never thought I'd be typing this out. For years, I've kept quiet about what happened that night in County Cork, but seeing others share their experiences here has given me the courage to finally tell my story. I grew up in a small village about 30 minutes outside of Cork City. My family's been there for generations. We're about as Irish as they come. My grandma lived with us in our old farmhouse that stood since the 1800s. When I was 16, I was up late one night, around 2 a.m., finishing a school project that was due the next day. Everyone else was asleep. Our house was always creaky and made noises, especially on windy nights, so I didn't think much of the occasional sounds I heard. But that night was different. Dead quiet outside. No wind, no rain, just complete stillness. I was sitting at my desk when the temperature in my room suddenly dropped. I'm not exaggerating when I say I could see my breath. It was August, for Christ's sake. Then I heard it. It started as a low moan, almost like the wind, but there was no wind that night. It grew into this wail, not like a human scream. Higher, more primal. It made every hair on my body stand up. I've never heard anything like it before or since. I was frozen in my chair. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It lasted maybe 15 seconds, but felt like forever. Then silence again. My first thought was to check on my grandma. She'd been sick recently, and all the old stories about banshees being harbingers of death rushed into my head. I know it sounds silly, but in that moment, I was terrified. I opened my door and peeked into the hallway. Nothing. The house was silent again. I crept down to my grandma's room and pushed the door open slowly. "Gran," I whispered. No answer. I approached her bed, my heart pounding. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see her lying there, not moving. "Gran?" I said louder, my voice cracking. I touched her shoulder, and she felt cold. I shook her gently, then harder. Nothing. I fumbled for the lamp by her bed and turned it on. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue. I'll never forget the expression, not frightened or in pain, just empty, gone. I screamed for my parents. Dad came running in, then Mom. The next few hours were chaos. Ambulance, police, neighbors coming over. The official cause was a heart attack in her sleep. She was 78, so it wasn't completely unexpected. But I know what I heard that night. Dad later told me something he'd never mentioned before. Apparently, our family has a banshee that's followed us for generations. His grandmother heard it before his uncle died, and his mother heard it before his father passed. They never talked about it because they didn't want to feed the superstition. I'm 32 now, living in Dublin. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Stress, grief, coincidence. But deep down, I know what I heard. When you grow up with the old stories, you recognize them when they come true. I've never heard the wail again, and honestly, I hope I never do, because now I know what it means. Story 6, I never thought I'd share this. Even now, 20 years later, my hands shake typing this out. This happened in rural North Carolina, summer of '98. I was staying with my aunt while my parents were going through their divorce. I was 12, angry at the world, and spent most of my time wandering the woods behind my aunt's property to escape the constant phone calls and crying. Our house backed up to dense forest with train tracks cutting through about a quarter-mile in. Nothing but trees, kudzu, and the occasional deer path. I knew those woods like the back of my hand after just 2 weeks there. That Tuesday was brutally hot, the kind of southern humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin. I'd been fighting with my aunt all morning about calling my dad, and I stormed out around noon, heading for my favorite spot, a small clearing near an old oak where the canopy opened just enough to let sunlight through. I remember checking my watch, 12:47 p.m. I always noted the time because my aunt would lose her mind if I wasn't back by dinner. The cicadas were deafening that day, so loud I almost missed the sound. A low mechanical whirring, like gears grinding, but somehow wet. It was coming from deeper in the woods, past the train tracks where I rarely ventured. "Hello," I called out, thinking maybe it was railroad workers. No answer. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me to. But being a stupid kid with something to prove, I followed the sound instead. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees as I crossed the tracks. No joke. It was like walking through an invisible barrier. The cicadas went silent too. Complete silence except for that grinding noise getting louder. The path narrowed between two steep embankments covered in thorny vines. I squeezed through, trying not to snag my t-shirt, when the smell hit me, like burnt metal and rotten eggs. That's when I saw it. Standing in a small gully was what I can only describe as a robot, but not like anything built by humans. It was tall, I'm at least 9 feet, with a body that looked like polished brass or gold. Not shiny gold, but a sick, jaundiced yellow that seemed to absorb the sunlight around it. Its head was bulbous with 2 curved horns that looked like they were melting into its skull. The face, God, that face. It had a permanent grimace, with too many teeth arranged in rows like a shark. Its eyes were black pits that seemed to leak some kind of dark fluid. It was partially bent over something on the ground. I couldn't see what, making these jerky mechanical movements. The whirring sound came from inside it, like thousands of tiny gears turning. I must have made a noise because it suddenly stopped and turned. Those black eyes locked onto mine, and the grimace somehow widened. "What the fuck?" I whispered, frozen in place. The thing straightened up. It moved wrong, like stop-motion animation, jerky and too fast, then too slow. Its joints bent backward as it took a step toward me. My body kicked into gear before my brain did. I turned to run and immediately tripped, tumbling back down toward the tracks. My elbow smashed into a rock, sending lightning pain up my arm. I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back, but I could hear it moving through the underbrush behind me. Metal scraping against trees, that wet grinding sound getting closer. "No!" I screamed, more in defiance than fear, though I was terrified beyond reason. Something hot and sharp grazed my shoulder. I didn't look. I just ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, across the tracks, through the familiar woods, not stopping until I burst through my aunt's back door. I slammed it shut and collapsed on the kitchen floor, hyperventilating. "Jimmy? What on earth?" My aunt came running in from the living room. "You're bleeding!" There was a dark stain spreading across my shoulder. When she helped me take my shirt off, we found 3 perfectly parallel cuts, each about 2 inches long. They weren't deep, but they wouldn't stop bleeding for hours. I told her I fell on some metal near the tracks. I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. Who would believe me? That night I heard the grinding sound again, distant but unmistakable, coming from the edge of the woods. I kept my curtains closed and didn't sleep. The next morning, curious against my better judgment, I went back to the tracks with my aunt's Polaroid camera. I needed proof of what I'd seen. There was nothing in the gully where the creature had stood. No footprints, no disturbed earth. Nothing except a perfect circle of dead vegetation about 6 feet wide. The ground inside it scorched black, like it had been subjected to intense heat. I never went into those woods again. My parents sorted things out a month later, and I went back home to Charlotte. I've never told anyone this story until now. Story 7. I've never told anything like this before, but after lurking on this sub for years, I figured I should finally share what happened to me. I'm a 32-year-old contractor from rural Maine, not exactly the type to believe in fairy tales or whatever. But this shit has been eating at me for 3 months now, and I need to put it somewhere. Back in January, we had that crazy cold snap, like negative 15 degrees for almost a week. I live alone in my grandfather's old house that sits on about 6 acres backing up to state forest land. The power went out around 10 p.m. one Tuesday, and after an hour of waiting for it to come back on, I decided to check the circuit breaker in the detached garage. The moon was almost full that night, and with the snow reflecting everywhere, I didn't even need a flashlight to see. I grabbed my heavy coat and boots and trudged through the knee-deep snow to the garage. That's when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from the edge of the woods. At first I thought it was probably just a branch or something, but it was too rhythmic, like someone or something was deliberately digging. Now in negative 15-degree weather, nothing should be digging. The ground was frozen solid at least 2 feet down. I stood there for a minute, trying to pinpoint where exactly the sound was coming from. It seemed to be about 30 yards into the tree line, where an old stone wall runs through the property. My grandfather always told me that wall was built in the 1700s. "Hello," I called out, feeling stupid immediately. If it was an animal, I was scaring it away. If it was a person, they probably wouldn't answer anyway. The scraping stopped instantly. I should have just gone back inside, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked toward where I'd heard the noise, following my own tracks from earlier that day when I'd gone to collect firewood. That's when I saw it. About 20 feet away, standing on top of the stone wall, was what I can only describe as not human. It was maybe 3.5 feet tall, humanoid, but with proportions all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging almost to its knees. Its skin was a grayish-green color that somehow both blended with and stood out against the snowy forest backdrop. But the worst part was its face. It had these huge reflective eyes, like a cat's but bigger, and no nose that I could see, just two slits. Its mouth was small but filled with what looked like dozens of needle-like teeth. It was wearing what looked like scraps of leather and fur bound together, and it was holding something in its hand. Some kind of crude metal tool, maybe an old chisel or small pickaxe. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. It wasn't like being scared of a bear or something. This was a primal fear I've never felt before or since. Like my brain was screaming that I was seeing something that shouldn't exist. Then it made this sound, not quite a hiss, not quite a growl, and dropped down behind the wall. I finally snapped out of it and ran back to the house, slammed the door and locked it. I spent the rest of that night huddled by the fireplace with my shotgun across my lap, convinced that any minute I'd hear scratching at the door or windows. The power came back on around 4 a.m., but I didn't sleep at all. The next morning I went back out to the stone wall, telling myself I had imagined it all, stress or exhaustion or whatever. But there were marks in the snow and dirt around the wall, small footprints different from any animal tracks I recognize, and a spot where it looked like someone had been digging at the base of the wall. I found a small piece of metal too, old and rusted, but clearly worked by human hands. Looked like part of a very old tool or maybe a coin. I've tried to find explanations. Maybe it was some kind of animal with mange. Maybe it was hypothermia making me hallucinate. Maybe some local kid playing a prank with a mask. But none of those explanations feel right. I grew up hearing my grandfather's stories about kobolds, little mind spirits from German folklore that his grandmother used to warn him about. They were supposed to live in old mines or under houses, sometimes helping, sometimes causing mischief if you disrespected them. He said they were known to collect metal objects. I never believed those stories. Still don't, really. But when I try to picture what a kobold might look like if they were real, it would look exactly like what I saw that night. I haven't seen it again, but sometimes I hear scraping or tapping sounds from the walls at night. And twice now, I've noticed small metal objects missing from my garage workbench. I don't know what I saw, but whatever it wasn't supposed to be there. Horror Story 8. I've never told anyone this story outside my immediate family. They all think I made it up or was confused, but I know what I saw. This happened back in 1997 when I was 8 years old. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, where not much ever happened. My grandfather was my hero, tall, gruff, but with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He'd take us grandkids on these adventures every few months, usually just to the mall or a park, but to us they were magical. That summer, Grandpa decided to take me and my cousin to see some Disney movie at the old Majestic Theater downtown. The place was ancient, built in the 1920s with peeling gold paint on the walls and those heavy velvet curtains that smelled like dust and time. This place used to have live shows before movies were even a thing. Grandpa told us as we walked down the sloped aisle toward our seats. Vaudeville acts, orchestras, the works. The theater was practically empty that day. Just a few other people scattered around. We got seats in the front row because Grandpa's knees were bad and he didn't want to climb the stairs. I remember fidgeting while he talked to the usher about something, bored and wanting popcorn. That's when I noticed the orchestra pit, this sunken area between the seats and the stage. It had a metal railing around it, and I wandered over, curious. "Don't lean on that," Grandpa called, but I was already peering over. The pit was dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized something wasn't right. There was no floor, just an opening straight to the basement below. And there, on the concrete floor of the basement, was... God, I still get chills thinking about it. It was an egg, not a normal egg. This thing was massive, maybe 4 feet tall. It had a white shell with a face painted on it, black eyes, a simple curved smile. But the worst part? It had arms and legs, skinny, pale limbs sticking out of the shell. It was lying on its back, flailing around like it was trying to get up but couldn't because of its rounded bottom. "Grandpa," I called, not taking my eyes off it. "Grandpa, there's something down there." "What are you talking about, kiddo?" He was still chatting with the usher. I looked back at him for just a second, then turned back to the pit. The egg was still there, but its face had changed. The painted smile was now a grimace of pain or frustration. The eyes were squeezed shut, like it was concentrating hard on trying to right itself. "Grandpa, please come look." My voice cracked. Something felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. He sighed and started walking over. I glanced at him coming toward me, then looked back down into the pit. The egg was gone. Just the bare concrete floor of the basement remained. "Grandpa, there was... Come on, sit down. Movie's about to start." He put his hand on my shoulder. I looked down one last time, and now there wasn't even a basement visible anymore. The orchestra pit had a wooden floor with a few folding chairs scattered around. Nothing else. "But it was just..." I said, "Sit down, Timothy." His tone left no room for argument. Throughout the entire movie, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about that Eggman thing, its painted face changing, those limbs flailing helplessly. Was it trapped down there? Was it trying to get out? And why did the pit itself seem to change? After the movie, while my cousin ran ahead to the car, I tugged on Grandpa's sleeve. "About that thing in the orchestra pit." His face changed. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. A tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. "What did you see down there exactly?" he asked quietly. I told him everything. The egg, the face, the limbs, how it all disappeared. He was quiet for a long moment, then knelt down to my level, his knees cracking. "The Majestic has stories. When I was young, my father told me never to look into the orchestra pit. Said it wasn't safe." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Some folks say when they built this place, something got trapped between here and somewhere else." "Like a ghost?" I asked. Not a ghost." He looked uncomfortable. "More like something that doesn't belong here at all. Something that can only be seen by accident." "But what was it?" "I don't know, and I don't want to know." He squeezed my shoulder. "And we're not coming back here, understand? No more Majestic." We never did go back. The theater closed down the following year. Something about structural issues. They eventually tore it down and built a parking lot. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was down there is still trapped, even with the building gone. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only one who saw it, or if others have glimpsed it too. But mostly I try not to think about that Eggman thing, still flailing, still trying to right itself, still trapped in a place it doesn't belong. I've looked up folklore from around the world, trying to find anything similar. The closest I've found are some old European tales about cosmic eggs that contain trapped beings. But nothing exactly like what I saw. All I know is that for one brief moment, I saw something impossible. And despite what my family thinks, I know it was real. Story 9. I never believed in the supernatural. Growing up in rural Oregon, you hear all kinds of stories about what lurks in the dense forests, but I always chalked it up to overactive imaginations and local folklore. That changed during a school trip when I was 11. Our 5th grade class went to this old hostel on the edge of the Cascade foothills for a 3-day outdoor education trip. The place was nothing special, just a weathered 2-story building with shared rooms and communal bathrooms that smelled like pine cleaner and mildew. But it sat right at the tree line where civilization ended and wilderness began. I was bunked with 4 other boys, Tyler, Marcus, Eli, and James. Our room had this big window that faced directly toward the forest. The first night, we did what kids do, tried to scare each other with ghost stories and claimed we saw something moving in the trees. Standard sleepover bullshit. The second night started the same way, but something felt different. The air was heavy and unusually still. No crickets, no wind in the trees, nothing. "Did you guys hear that?" Tyler whispered around 11 p.m., sitting up in his bed. "You're full of crap," Marcus said, though I noticed he'd stopped playing his handheld game. I rolled my eyes but moved to the window anyway. "There's nothing out there, man." That's when I saw them. 2 purple dots glowing in the darkness about 20 meters from the hostel. They hovered at what would be eye level for an adult. "Holy shit," I whispered. "Guys?" They all crowded around me at the window. No one spoke. "It's probably just a reflection," Eli said, but his voice cracked. The purple dots blinked once, then vanished. "See? Nothing," Marcus started to say, but then gasped. The dots reappeared about 10 meters to the right, but this time, there was enough moonlight filtering through the clouds that we could make out a vague silhouette. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too thin, maybe too tall. The proportions were just off. "What the fuck is that?" James whispered, grabbing my shoulder. None of us answered. We couldn't move. Then the shape turned slightly, and a second pair of identical purple eyes appeared beside it. They were standing side by side now, 4 glowing purple dots in the darkness, and I knew with absolute certainty they were looking directly at us. "They can see us," I said, my mouth so dry the words barely came out. "Should we get Mr. Peterson?" Tyler asked, referring to our teacher. "No one move," Eli whispered. "If we leave the window, they might disappear, and no one will believe us." So we stayed frozen, 5 terrified kids staring at 2 unidentifiable figures at the forest edge. Minutes passed. My legs started cramping from staying in one position, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Then one of the figures raised what must have been an arm. The gesture wasn't threatening. It was almost like a greeting or a beckoning. "It wants us to come outside," Marcus whispered. "Fuck that," James responded immediately. The figure stood motionless for another minute or two, still watching us. Then, as if they'd communicated silently with each other, they both turned at the exact same moment and walked into the forest. The purple eyes disappeared among the trees. We stayed at the window for at least another half hour, but they never returned. None of us slept that night. We pushed our beds together in the middle of the room, as far from the window as possible. The next morning, we told Mr. Peterson, who humored us but clearly thought we were making it up. When we begged to check for footprints, he took us out there, but the ground was covered in pine needles and hard dirt. Nothing showed. I'm 26 now, and I've never seen anything like that again. I've researched local folklore, cryptids, even rare animals with reflective eyes, but nothing matches what we saw. The human-like shape, the perfectly identical purple eyes, the deliberate way they moved. Story 10. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but after lurking on paranormal threads for years, I guess it's time. This happened in November 2018, and I still get chills thinking about it. My husband Jake and I live in rural Pennsylvania, where the winters come early and the nights get dark fast. Jake works swing shifts at the paper mill about 30 miles from our house, and sometimes I drive with him just to keep him company on the late drive home. That night was unusually cold for November, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. We were heading back around 10:30 p.m. on the old viaduct that spans the river valley. If you've ever driven it, you know it's just this long stretch of elevated concrete with barely any shoulder. Just a straight shot over the darkness below. "You want to grab something to eat when we get back?" Jake asked, fiddling with the heater. It was blasting, but the car still felt cold. "Maybe just..." I stopped mid-sentence. There it was. This thing suddenly appeared on the right side of the road. At first I thought it was a child, but no. It was short, maybe 3 feet tall, but built like a stocky old man. It had these freakishly long arms that hung down past its knees, swinging as it walked, and it was walking directly towards our car from the right shoulder. "Jake, watch out!" I screamed, but it was too late. The thing was right in front of our car. We should have hit it. At 50 miles per hour, we should have demolished it, but somehow we didn't feel any impact. I sat there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Then Jake suddenly shot up in his seat, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "What the fuck was that?" he shouted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. My blood ran cold. You saw it too? That fucking dwarf thing walking across the road?" His voice was shaking. "It was right in front of us on my side. Then I saw it behind us. The car behind us swerved." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jake had seen it too, and not just in the same place I did, but somehow it had moved from the right side to directly in front of him on the left in a split second. The thing had been wearing clothes. That's what made it even more disturbing. A maroon vest and brownish short pants, like some twisted version of a garden gnome. And a hat, definitely a hat. Its face was wrong. Thick features, gnarly, like bark on an old tree. Jake pulled over at the next exit, his hands trembling so badly he could barely work the turn signal. The car behind us, the one that swerved, just kept driving. "What the hell did we just see?" I whispered. The windows were starting to fog from our panicked breathing. "I don't know," Jake said. "But it wasn't human, and we should have hit it. It was right there." We didn't talk much on the rest of the drive home. What was there to say? We'd both seen the same impossible thing, a creature that shouldn't exist, that somehow appeared in front of our car on a viaduct 50 feet above a river valley, moved instantly from one side to another, and vanished without impact. I still drive that viaduct sometimes. I always slow down at that spot, my eyes scanning the darkness at the edges of the road. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know we both saw it, and that's what scares me the most. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.